Hi, welcome back to another episode of Tuba People TV, where we talk about Arnold Jacobs all of the time. Puddles and I are in Rockledge, Florida. This is James Bishop. James was on the faculty at Northwestern University when I was in college there, teaching saxophone. And along the way, you had some studies with Mr. Jacobs, and I'm really curious to find out about that.
Well, I first learned about Arnold Jacobs from Tom Wade, who is a local tubist and who studied some with Jake back in the 60s and early 70s. And also from one of our local musicians, Joe Krynas, who just passed away here very recently. You'll remember that Joe did the low brass album with CSO back in the 60s.
Yep. Very famous.
Yeah, very famous, and still very good.
Yeah.
It's amazing, especially when we consider how old it is.
It's got to be 60 years old or so. Yeah.
So anyway, those were the first two people who told me about Jake. And then when I got to school at Northwestern, I transferred in. I did my last 3 years at Northwestern. Several of the saxophone players had gone down and taken lessons with Jake. And one of them was Bob Black. I don't know if you remember.
Edison Band and Orchestra. Right. He used to be my employer. Yes, I worked there.
Oh, really? Okay, so you know Bob.
Yeah.
So very, very fine saxophonist, and was at the top of the saxophone class when I came into Northwestern. And anyway, I was very much interested in finding out what made Bob Bob.
Yeah.
And so he said, one of the things that had been very influential on his playing was lessons with Jacobs. So I determined, well, that's something that I needed to do, because I had gone from being one of the best saxophonists around to just a saxophonist, and I didn't really like that feeling very much.
Yeah.
So anyway, like I said, I was determined to improve what I was doing. So I got hooked up with lessons with Jacobs, and I did a total of 3, and I did not end up going back because basically he kicked me out of the nest after that point, saying, you're not a tuba player. You've heard what I have to say, and so you need to. And if you want to come back for a refresher at some point, that'll be fine. I never did. But the interesting thing about Jake is that literally in the space of one lesson, he had completely changed the way I thought about a musical line.
Interesting, yes.
And obviously everything about how to produce that musical line as well. But, I say that because in the end, the emphasis is on the music, as it always was with Jake, and even with me as a saxophone player and his limited knowledge of what saxophone was all about. Not to say that he was illiterate in any way, but that was just obviously a little bit out of his wheelhouse.
Sure.
But one of the first things he asked me is, why are you here? Obviously you're a saxophone player, and I'm a tuba player, so what is it you're trying to get? And so I told him, well, I was trying to get better at breath control, support of my sound, projection, beauty of sound, and that in my mind I had an idea of the saxophone sounding something like a cello, which was at that time the best that I could imagine what it was supposed to be about. Obviously, my ideas of saxophone sounds changed and morphed over the years, but still that cello thing is still there, you know, to a certain extent. So Jake said, you know, that all sounds good, basically. So why don't you play for me a little bit and let's hear what you're doing. So I was working on, this was early on in my tenure as a student at Northwestern, and I was working on a Fairling etude, and the first one is slow and lyrical. It's written in the key of C major, and so I started playing that for him. And he let me play about halfway through it, and then he said, "Well, that's fine. Let's talk about it a little bit." And he said to me, "Well, the first thing that we need to think about is your concept of line, of musical line. You're blowing air on notes. You're trying to play from note to note, and you're not really playing a classical line. It's not that you're playing unmusically, but it's not the way a classical musician would think of it, or orchestral musician, or a cellist. That's just not the way they would do it." Because I was kind of sing-songing through things. So he said, "Let me play for you." So he played for me a little bit, just read my music and played the same thing I had just played. And of course, the thing I noticed right away was that the incredible beauty of the sound. That was number one. I had never heard a tuba player play like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was, for one thing, his use of vibrato was just, it was amazing. It was what I wanted to sound like.
Yeah.
You know? And the fact, looking back on it now, the way he used the air over the line and not on individual notes. And the shaping of his line was over an entire phrase. And so he shaped a phrase, not individual notes. So that right away was very, very different. It was much more subtle than what I did. And so all of that was interesting. And like I said, it was a completely different way of looking at a musical line. And I was very intrigued by it, you know, obviously. So that was the first thing. And so in many ways, what Jake did for me was completely change in that first lesson. And, you know, there were others after Jake at Northwestern who reinforced the same thing, but he was the first one who really kind of laid down the law about what a classical line was supposed to be all about. You know, eventually I heard the same things from Hemke, and I heard these things from Painter and from the other fine woodwind teachers that I worked with and had time with. You know, Ray Still said the same thing, Bob Marcellus said the same thing, you know, Wally Kujala said the same thing. But I first heard it from Jake. in that sense, I mean, he really, really changed the way I thought about a musical phrase. And he changed right there with just that one thought how I was going to use the air as a musician. And it changed for me the way I taught for the next 50 years, the way I teach things today. You know, the thing that I look for first and foremost now is a student's ability to support a musical line. And one of the things that Jake was got on me about right away was the fact that I changed the air between notes. And I've become very, very sensitive with my students to the fact that they don't keep the air moving between the notes. And of course, as you know, the music is not the notes, the music is the connection between the notes. So that is so fundamental to everything that we do as musicians. And this was literally the first time I had heard it. And, you know, looking back on it in retrospect, is I didn't have bad teachers before I went away to Northwestern, but nobody ever challenged that aspect of my playing. And to this day, I don't know why.
Interesting. Well, it is interesting. From my own studies with him, and something that I teach is similar to what you're talking about, is just to blow through the notes, not at them.
Right.
Is that, would you say that's a...
Well, yeah. You know, I mean, you're using different words,
Yeah.
but it's the same, the concept is exactly
Same concept,
the same.
yeah.
You know, so yeah, blowing through the phrase as opposed to blowing at the notes, you know, is so important. And, you know, after we finished talking about my performance or lack thereof, then he started to get into a little bit more about how was producing the sound. And, you know, I can't remember exactly the order that things went, because it's over 50 years now. But at one point during the lesson, one of the things he did for me was measure my lung capacity, which was right about 3 liters, something like that. And he said that wasn't an extraordinary volume either way, too small or too or excessive. But if I was going to be able to play the length of phrases that I wanted to, I was going to have to be efficient with the way I used the air. In other words, everything that I'm getting in, then I'm getting that back out. So that led to him talking to me about my sound and what he perceived in my sound. And he said what he heard was that my sound was kind of constrained and kind of constricted. Now I find this an interesting thing because, like I said, Jake obviously was not a saxophone player, and he had heard some good saxophone players, obviously. He had heard Fred Henke playing with him in the Chicago Symphony, so he was aware of that. But even though saxophone was not his instrument, he could listen to my sound, and he could tell through my sound what I was doing in terms of production that was detrimental to my production of tone.
Yeah.
And like I said, I find that to be kind of a fascinating thing.
I do too. Yeah.
You know, that his ear was that sensitive to that aspect, and is probably why he's, at least in my opinion, the greatest wind teacher of the 20th century.
Yeah, quite. I wouldn't disagree with you, and
Yeah.
that's certainly open for discussion. But I
certainly.
I tend to agree. Yeah.
Well, the reason I say the greatest wind teacher is because it opens it up to a larger group than just tuba.
Or brass even.
Yeah, or brass for that matter.
Yeah.
That in many ways his teaching was seminal to wind playing in the 20th century.
Yeah.
You know, for years, so many of the fine performers who got jobs in the Chicago Symphony ended up in Jake's studio taking lessons.
Laurie Bloom.
Yes,
Yeah.
you know, I watched that video.
Yeah.
But you know, before that, I had heard the players in the orchestra had told me that, you know, when they had new people, they all recommended that they all go and take a lesson with Jacob. And so for me, that Chicago sound, it's really a Jake sound.
Mm-hmm.
You
That
know?
buoyancy.
Yeah.
That immediacy.
Right.
Right.
The effortless nature of the sound production,
Mm-hmm.
you know, that's a Jake thing.
Yeah.
You know, and obviously you can produce beautiful sounds in other ways. People do it all the time.
Yeah.
You know, but it doesn't have the same character of sound that Chicago sound has.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I took that into my teaching. You know, I was the band and orchestra director at Eastern Florida State College for 31 years. And, you know, every day in my band rehearsal, you know, I was starting out the rehearsal trying to teach, you know, long tones and slurred scales. Don't use your tongue. It's gonna interrupt your airstream. You know, so the first 5 minutes, you know, of every rehearsal, I was trying to teach them Arnold Jacobs, and just to get that flow of air going with every one of them, because it, you know, as Jake told me, from here back, you know, after the embouchure's out of the way, all of us as wind players, we should all be doing it the same way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's the same for all of us.
Right. Respiration. Sure.
Yeah, right. So that aspect to me, it's everything. It makes everything else possible about playing the instrument. So anyway, one of the things that he told me after measuring my lung capacity was he noticed that I was definitely not getting out all the air that I was taking in. So I was right there being less than efficient with my air and my use of air. And so he started, you know, had me play a little bit again. He started, you know, touching here and there. And so one of the first things he noticed was that I was very, very tight in my abdominal region. And he asked me, you know, well, why are you so tight down there? Well, you know, I'm trying to support the air, and I'm trying to get the air moving fast, and you know, in order to generate faster moving air column, you know, and to blow from the diaphragm as I was taught to do, you know, and my band director used to come around and punch us in the stomach.
Right, I remember that. Yeah.
Yes.
I remember that happening in my pre-Jacobs days.
Yes. And so he sort of smiled. He was a kind gentleman, wasn't he? You know, he never, unlike some other teachers and very good teachers I had, he never told us we were idiots, even though he must have thought that on occasion.
Possibly. Yes. Yeah.
So that was one, in terms of the physical things that he worked on me with. That's probably the hardest thing that I have had to overcome in over the last 50 years.
Getting rid of the tight gut.
Yeah, getting rid of
moving to something else.
Yeah, right. It's a habit that's hard to break, especially when you've been taught something and you've been doing it 5, 6, 7 years. What I find in my own playing, my own music making, is that I tend to go back to the very first thing I ever did.
Sure.
You know, and we never really break bad habits. We replace them with new good habits.
Exactly.
You know.
Exactly right. Yeah.
And so it's always been a little bit difficult for me, this whole tension thing. I don't play as much as I used to. You know, I'm 72, I'm retired. And when I play, I'm playing here in church. I sing, obviously, because I'm choir director here at the Presbyterian Church. So I'm singing quite a bit. And that relates back to Jake too.
It does, absolutely.
You know, so the principles for singing are no different than they are for playing the saxophone. And so, you know, whenever I have a problem with my sound, then I start to try and dissect what it is I'm doing that is impeding my production of sound.
Yeah.
And almost always it has something to do these days still with tension that starts in the gut area. And you know, one of the things that Jake disabused me of in terms of ideas of production was what the diaphragm was for.
Yeah.
You know, all these people back in the 60s used to teach me, you know, you have to blow from your diaphragm. Well, you know, he told me that the diaphragm was an involuntary muscle over which I had little or no control, and it just acted as a bellows, and all depended on how it was that I was taking in and getting out the air. So this blew my mind because this was completely the opposite of what I had been taught. And I didn't have problems so much with the idea of what the diaphragm did. I mean, once he explained it, it was perfectly obvious. But I did have problems and still work on the tension aspects.
What did he, back in those lessons, what did he have you start doing that was meant to help start a new habit that would...
Well, one of the first things he did was, you know, obviously work on my inward breath.
Okay.
All right. And he told me he wanted me to think of the syllable H-O when I breathed in.
Right, it's a suck area.
And yes, right, we're getting there. And I went, and he said, now, that's a good start. Make it silent so that I don't hear you at all. And of course, what that does is it opens up this region down here, and it opens up this region up here as well. And if you do that the way he was asking you to do, there cannot be any tension in the abdominal area.
Right.
I mean, just,
Right.
you know, it just disappears.
Right.
Well, that was like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. I'm not sure how I'm going to do this when I'm playing the instrument, but you know, it makes sense in terms of what he's telling me. And so we moved from that then to how we were going to refine that. And he had me take the neck pipe of my instrument, you know, and put my lips around the neck pipe like this, and breathe in. Now think the same thing. Now, of course, what he was forcing me to do was breathe, focus the air at my lips, at the front of my mouth.
Yes.
And so, you know, that was interesting as well. And I must admit, at that point in the lesson, information was coming at me like through a fire hose. Exactly.
Yeah.
You know, and I was overwhelmed, and all of this was so new and so different that it was kind of shocking. Everything he said made sense.
Yeah.
And everything he said worked the way, but, you know, translating that back into playing the saxophone, but that was something that, for me, as I look back on it, I think it took about 5 years.
I mean, you've been trained in somewhat the opposite operational, physiological understanding and manners. So, how did you have anything like that? Oh yeah, same thing. I was keep the. I had pre-Jacobs. I'd been taught to keep the shoulders down, keep the sternum down, keep this tight, breathe in. Okay, now play. So it was all very tight, and so I was at best a half breather. Right. At best, I never got above half of my vital capacity. So I was always in that negative part of the respiration, where the tension increased exponentially as I.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that I'm one of the only. Well, I know I wasn't the only one, but it's kind of interesting to compare.
Yeah.
So anyway, you know, he was trying to reorient where I was thinking of the air coming in, and then we started talking about, you know, getting the air out, and you know, he had me play once again. And I was getting in more air at this point. But he had me play once again, and he told me that it seemed that to him that I was blowing from the back of my mouth. Like this. Yeah. And blowing more from my throat and the back of my mouth. Yeah. And, you know, he also went around and did some of this while I was playing. Sure. And he said that he needed me to say some vowel sounds. E, and he's asked me where was the back of my tongue when I was playing. And, you know, I played a little bit and I said, I'm not really sure. And he said, well, you know, do it until you are. And he said to me that the tongue is one of the least sensitive muscles in the body, that it doesn't have the same sense of location that other muscles have. You know, like you put your hand behind you, you don't have to see it, but you know where your hand is. Yeah. He says it's not the same thing with the tongue. So, you know, you're going to have to kind of do it a little bit until you figure out. So I said, I played a little bit more and I said, I think it's E. I said, okay, well, that's going to cause you some problems of your flow of air out, because that's causing you to have a smaller oral
Right.
cavity. And he said, you probably will be better off if you're using an ah position, because your oral cavity is going to be more open, the back of the tongue will come forward just a little bit more, and there'll just be more room for the air to get through. All right? That was really difficult. I mean, that was much more difficult. I don't think I succeeded at all in that first lesson, getting that tongue anywhere close to where it was supposed to be. And that's another one that I struggled with mightily for years. Now, I will say that is not an issue for me any longer with when I play the instrument, because that oral cavity has become so used to where it needs to be. And if I hear even the slightest constriction in my sound, I start thinking, and getting that back of the tongue down and getting the oral cavity open. But man, I couldn't do anything with it at first. It just was, so unnatural to me.
Yeah.
But obviously what's talking about and what he tried to explain to me was, what we're trying to do is get you to play your instrument in a manner that is most in concert with the way your body normally is. Mm-hmm. And he says, think about this. You don't walk around on a street on a normal day going, ee. You just don't, do that. Where is your tongue normally? Ah. That's where it is normally. Right. And when you play, you're only going to somewhat exaggerate what you're normally doing and naturally doing. So, that part became really, really important for me in my teaching, as I started to emphasize to kids that you've got to figure out what is most normal and natural in terms of how you approach the instrument. And of course, what kids think is normal and natural is not normal and natural. That's just something that they did in order to make that first sound. Mm-hmm. And once they got that first sound, it was like, this is the way it is. No, not necessarily. You may be producing it right, but in most cases, you don't produce it correctly the first time. So you've got to start to refine from that point to play in concert with what your body really wants you to do in order to be the most efficient musical machine that you can be as a human being. Mm-hmm. So that was another thing that he worked on with me, this position of the tongue in the oral cavity.
Did he help to identify moments of success when you were able to do the ah? Was he able to say, yeah, that's it, either through some sort of tactile or maybe a sound? Or?
Yeah, he did encourage me when he thought I was getting closer to it. Okay. But I was so far away from it, and I was having such problems with it that it was blowing my mind. Yeah. That part of it was when I tried to go to that ah position, I just completely lost control of the instrument, because I think I was probably trying to force my tongue down, and all that did was introduce other problems. Yeah. But yes, he did encourage me when I was going in the right direction, and the inner respiration part was much better. The next thing that he did with me was to try to reorient the way I was blowing out the air. And basically what he told me was that I was trying to push the air out.
Yeah. Right.
And that I was blowing from my upper chest, and that I was compressing the air in my upper chest. And that was one of the things that was leading to the improper placement of the air in my mouth, because that all goes together, you know, blowing from the upper chest and the placement of the tongue and blowing from the back of the mouth. So he said, we talked about breathing in from your lips. You need to blow out from your lips.
Yes.
You know, because that's where the, you know, he told me that's where the action is, that's where your reed is, that's where your embouchure is. Right. You have to imagine that you're blowing from here.
Right.
And that made the most sense for me in that lesson. It made the most difference in terms of getting that tongue placement to start to work. Mm-hmm. But once again, this was something that was just anathema to what I had been taught.
Sure. Right.
Because I had been taught to blow, that you want to hear a warm sound, so you need to blow warm air.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Well,
not very directional.
No, it's not very, you know, and as I look back on it 50 years later, it's like, why would anybody think that those two things go together?
I mean, why did people think that you blew air from the diaphragm? I mean, it's the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, so it basically, if there was a production problem that could be had, I had it. You know.
As did I.
Yeah, and I also had embouchure problems. That wasn't something he fixed. Fred Hemke, you know, fixed that problem with me. But you know, that was the basically what happened in that first lesson. And what happened in the second and third lesson was just going back, and those second and third lessons, those were not nearly as intense as that first lesson. And in the second and third lesson, he was just reminding me. And basically, the third lesson, he ended the lesson and told me, "I'm not going to charge you today because, you know, we're getting out of here early. You really don't need me at this point. You know, come back if you need a refresher at some point." And he just basically kicked me out of the door at that point.
That's great. So that first lesson was very intense, and then the second and third lessons were just reinforcing, reminding.
Right. There was really no new information in the second and third lessons.
When was this? What year or year?
1973.
1973. Okay.
Yeah, it was my fall quarter. So my first year.
Was that his house?
No, I was down. Yeah,
it was. So it was right when he started at the Fine Arts Building.
Yeah,
okay.
Right. That was right when he started there, and you know, obviously he had everything all set up there in the office, and it was convenient to get to.
Oh yes.
Yeah, off of the L.
Oh yes.
You know.
Yeah. Oh. Fine Arts Building, Orchestra Hall.
Right. Yeah. Right. So yeah, it was amazing. It really was, and I'm so grateful that I had that time with Jake. In a lot of ways, I really feel like Jake taught me to play the saxophone, and Fred Hemke coached my musicianship to a large extent. And over the years, Hemke ended up saying a lot of the same things that Jake did. And I think to a large extent that even though I don't believe that Fred ever took a lesson with Jake, I think he picked up a lot of Jake's pedagogy.
From his students.
Yeah. From his students. Yeah. And ended up using a lot of the same language. Over the years and teaching the same thing.
Interesting.
You know, one of Fred's things was to swallow a column of air, and then get that column of air back into the instrument, I don't remember Jake using that, but it goes
Similar,
yeah. It's similar language.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I love the whole notion that he was having you blow through the notes, not at them. You're blowing through from one note to the next, connecting them rather than sometimes what I'll describe to some of my students that they're getting this sort of this sausage or hot dog shape of their air where it's biggest in the middle and
right.
And it sounds like that's what he was discovering.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the big things that I had to work on was getting the air to move before the note did, at least in my mind, to get the air at the tip of the tongue before it came off of the reed.
Yeah.
So that immediately when the tongue came off of the reed, that the sound would start immediately. And it would not do you know, and that was something that I worked on a lot with my students in my band, to get them to get the sound to start right away without you know.
Well, that raises another interesting question. You know, Jacobs' pedagogy is largely one-on-one. It's shared one-on-one.
Right.
How did you, get that one-on-one into a large classroom setting?
Well, it goes back to something that we were talking about earlier, which is, you know, from here back, we all do it the same. And in terms of what we want the sound to be on each individual instrument, the way we want it to start, the way we want it to end, the way we want it to connect, those things are universal. Making music is a universal thing. There's a universal way that classical musicians create sound. There's a universal way that classical musicians interpret a phrase. And that doesn't mean that we're all cookie cutter, because we're not. But we work within certain acceptable boundaries that we have all agreed upon for centuries about what is good music making. So, you know, the pedagogy that Jake did one-on-one with us in studio was something that I thought worked perfectly in terms of translating to an ensemble, because we all need to be doing those things. And in that sense, it works for everybody, you know. Oh, that's universal.
Yeah.
You know, a beautiful sound to the start of the note, a sustained note all the way through, and a tapered lift and release at the end. You know, what else do you need?
Yeah. Well, great sound at the beginning, middle, and end.
Right.
Good articulation.
Right, exactly. A
Shape at the end.
a good start to the note. There's got to be enough air there to start the lips vibrating or the reed vibrating, or in terms of the flute, the column of air vibrating immediately when the tongue comes away from the roof of the mouth or the reed. And you've got to make sure that the air pressure is there, and that the tongue pressure is light enough that it doesn't give you this artificial sound before the tone starts, you know. And then you've got to be able to support the air at the end to give you the proper kind of a release to the note, whatever it may be. You've got to be able to support all the way to the end of the note and past the end of the note, so that you've got control of the note until the sound is gone.
Yeah, great. Well, I get these questions from music education students who are interested in Jacobs' pedagogy. Jim, it's so good to see you. It's been 40 years since we last saw you. And as usual, Puddles has made sure I I brought something to share with you, a little gift, a little TubaPeopleTV glass for your favorite refreshment.
Well, I'll definitely have to put my water in there.
There you go. Now, I should warn you, it is not dishwasher safe. Just warm, soapy water
Okay.
is the best way to wash that, to keep the paint on the glass.
Well, I must admit, I don't use the dishwasher very much, but it
Okay.
makes a very good drying rack.
It does.
Yes.
All right.
Well, thank you.
Jim.
This was a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us into your space here, and
Well, thank you
it's
for
great to see you.
thank you for coming to Rockledge. I hope you had a good trip to Florida.
Yeah, so far so good.
Yeah, good. You got here for the best weather.
Yeah.
We've been a little cold lately.
Okay. Yeah, it's supposed to be warmer tomorrow, so
Yeah.
looking forward to that. We're gonna spend the day doing stuff outside tomorrow, I think.
All right.
Talking about my son Kenton.
Yes.
Yes, we'll get a picture of him later.
All right.
And now back to you.